My name is Cary. I live in Edinburgh. I'm in Edinburgh Central SNP. I am a military veteran of 12 years. I enlisted in the U.S. Navy when I was 19 years old. Right before September 11th. It happened while I was in school to be an aviation electrician, and 3 months later, I was in Bahrain. I was a flight engineer on P3 Orions, which are now they've transitioned to the P8s, similar to how the Nimrods did that here, I believe. And it's just been, I live in Scotland because I go to uni and I live off my GI Bill. So the military is still very much a part of, it keeps having lasting effects on my life, even though, I retired a little over 5 years ago now. And yeah, just happy to be here.
Yeah, so I'm Carol Monaghan. I'm the SNP Armed Forces and Veterans spokesperson. And I was just saying that I come from a military family. My husband served in the Trident submarines, and it was the wee on Trident submarines, and did a number of deterrent patrols. So yeah, I'll enjoy talking a little bit this afternoon about how the rhetoric has been managed by the British government in terms of the experience of families. And my experience, I reckon, was pretty typical. And I was also saying that I remember one time where my husband dropped me off at an anti-Trident march and then drove to Faslane to serve on the Trident submarine. So I think there is a probably that's pretty typical that we can support the personnel themselves without necessarily supporting the policy and the direction of travel. And it's interesting, Kat's talking about P8s. I'm expecting my husband and his friend to arrive any moment, and his friend is currently serving on the P8s. So thanks very much.
Yeah, good afternoon, folks. My name's Cliff Purvis. For the past 7 years, I've been an admin on the Veterans for Scottish Independence 2.0 site. As well as I was saying there, I am from a military family. My father served in the military for 25 years. I myself did 24 years. I was joined the Army in that wonderful period where we still had very good postings to go to. In fact, my second posting was Hong Kong for my sins, which kind of set the scene for everywhere else I was posted thereafter. So I split my time. I did 14 years with Queen's Own Highlanders doing infantry work, and then a further 10 years with the Royal Army Medical Corps. Since leaving the military, I've done a couple of jobs, but nowadays I teach first aid for a living.
What's your perspective of what an independent Scotland has to do to keep a really solid relationship with the armed service forces?
Absolutely. Now, we over at the Veterans side of things, we've been very active in social media, marches, rally, that type of thing. And we are talking to those still in uniform. Now, out of necessity, they'd rather keep their names off anything. And I totally get that. I totally understand that. Yeah. But I managed to secure some information from some people. And it was actually a well laid out piece of paper highlighting the concerns and I think target areas that we need to reach if we are going to convince those still serving and veterans that an independent Scotland is the way ahead. It covered absolutely everything from encouraging people to join the forces, whereabouts the training would be, what historically would be the cap badge element. I'm really probably focusing on the Army here, but historically our cap badges have meant everything. And being a Queen's Own Highlander, I'm well aware of that. So is there any room for manoeuvre to reinstate the cap badges? I know it will never be at regimental size of units, and there's no need for it. But reintroducing cap badges along our sort of Army side of things to get that sense of belonging back in. The pensions, now this is something myself and Carol have been talking about at great length over a long period of time. The securing from our UK on the truth behind what will be happening in an independent Scotland to military pensions. So yes, we have got some work cut out for us to convince these people that an independent Scotland is the right idea. But we need to start pushing the government in Holyrood to start producing papers on the subject.
Kat, what's the couple of things that you think would help current armed service forces consider independence who are maybe not really there yet?
You know, we spend a lot of time talking about how many ships or whether we're going to be in NATO or not. But I do think that when it comes to speaking to people that are in the forces or our veterans, when you start talking about concrete plans, I had mentioned this at least once, I think already, is that, you know, are we going to have facilities? Is there going to be medical facilities that are within this many miles of wherever you live in Scotland? I think we've talked about how, you know, a lot of the defense budget for the UK, they'll have the forces, like the military contractors that don't live in Scotland. Well, we want to keep people to, like, we want people who want to live in the Highlands and Islands, right? In more rural communities, want to live there. Is that workable? Is there things going to be, you know, is there going to be production and opportunities over there? I think it is really, it's not the most exciting things to talk about, but it's just those little things that you can explain to people. You know, there's free university here, but what kind of other training, how will the jobs and training in the military forces, how will that translate into jobs? Will there be, like, you know, some kind of journeyman electrician pipeline or something coming from there? So those are just a few things that I can think of off the top of my head that will really make a difference and speak to people that are in the military, even though they might not catch anyone else's attention, which, you know, sometimes that's a good thing.
And Carol, a couple of things off the, you know, the kind of forefront of your mind, which you think would make a difference from that kind of no to yes journey?
Well, it's interesting the things that Kat's mentioned, because over the next week or so, we're actually going to publish a paper that we've been working on for a couple of years, and I know some of our SNP military members have been involved in that paper, where it's going to look at what, you know, what should we be offering and what would be the best possible outcomes for military in an independent Scotland. And the bottom line is we need to make it attractive. And as Cliff has already said, he raised some questions about pensions. Would a British Army or military pension be safe in an independent Scotland? So we've done some work in that. And the answer is absolutely yes. And we've got the information there from the UK government that is the case. Your pension doesn't depend on the country that you end up living in. So the things like that. But the bottom line is, when you talk to personnel, and please feel free to correct me, the things that make a difference are really straightforward things: housing, families, education. You know, the biggest challenge for families in the military is having to continually move from place to place, put down roots again, try and re-establish education, all of that. So let's look very simply about having family or having accommodation within a certain distance from home, and that's where they're based, and that's it. We're a small enough country that we can be agile with that, and people can choose where they want to be based. But actually having families that are able to put down their roots, because I'm sorry, we've moved on from the wife just raises the children and sits at home and lunches with other military wives. We've moved on. Quite often it's the husband that's the non-serving partner. But we also need to consider that partners also have their own careers. They don't want to be moving about. They want to actually live their own lives as well. So these simple things, so if we can get that right and give a good offering, make it attractive, I really think that is one of the keys to winning this.
One thing I kind of wanted to cover was your views on how the UK government as a whole kind of deals with remembrance. And Cliff, would you like to go first on that?
The act of remembrance is very much an individual thing. If people want to remember the fallen, then that's entirely up to them. What colour of poppy they wear is again an individual preference. For myself, I wear the red one, and I do mark it as an act of remembrance. Successive governments have, slapping the poppy on everything they possibly can, every bit of hardware they possibly can, is actually, I think, devaluing what it's supposed to be about. I mean, it's supposed to be a very somber and poignant moment in the calendar where we remember the folly, no offence, Carol, but when politicians don't get it right, and then what the cost in human life is. Anybody that has anywhere been near where rounds are flying about fully understands that it's not the nicest of situations. So yeah, the UK government in the last 10 years easily have started to slide down a slippery road as far as the Act of Remembrance goes. And it ties in also with the Armed Forces Day as well.
And is that something, Cliff, you'd like to see in independent Scotland take a different approach to that?
I think we should remember our fallen, that's without a shadow of a doubt, but it should be, I think, done in a slightly more restrained way, the way it was done before. Yes, you have veterans on parade, you have armed forces on parade, that type of thing. But just now, there seems to be a poppy on absolutely everything, ranging from Typhoon aircraft down to a football strip. And you're just wondering, what are they trying to message? Are they trying to get out?
Kat, I'd love to hear your view. I think you've been in Scotland, long enough to have probably noticed if there has been any kind of change in how remembrance is done.
I think this is something that doesn't quite translate directly, as you kind of said, but I do think that there's certain themes and elements that are kind of not universal, but Western democracy wise. One thing is that Remembrance Day and month is very focused on the wars of the 20th century. As a veteran, I feel like it's not quite for me, and it's not supposed to be for me. And there's a generation of veterans, of war veterans, who aren't included, and perhaps purposefully so. It does seem like there is always aggressive, like, where's your poppy? Don't wear a poppy. Things are politicized in the United States like that as well. But I do think, there's the performative show of it, which some people need, and perhaps it's okay to mark that, and like Cliff said, in a restrained manner. But when it comes down to actual remembrance, are you taking care of people's families? Are you taking care of wounded veterans? Are you taking care of people who served in the armed forces? That's something that I don't think any country quite gets right. But if you're focusing on that, I think that there's less need for the pageantry. And also there might be, it might just not be something that there's an interest in. But like I kind of said before, perhaps because this is like the royal forces and we're independent supporters in Scotland, there is a measure of distrust, or it's not hostility. It's just kind of like, why would you be in the military? Can I trust you to actually support independence, kind of thing? And that's a two-way street. And I think getting rid of some of the pageantry might help with that a little bit.
Great. And Carol, how different can we expect things? And I'd love your view of how you've seen remembrance and treatment of veterans over the last, let's say, 10 years or so.
Yes, there's been a definite shift, and I think some of that is actually positive. I think sort of the increase of marking Armed Forces Day gives members of the public probably a better understanding of what it is to serve in the military. The problem is that if you attend an Armed Forces Day event, often the people that are there are from a particular demographic, shall we say, and they don't necessarily represent the diversity of our society and the diversity in a city like Glasgow, where I am. So I think, first of all, there's that issue. We've got a situation now where anything we do to a poppy or a wreath, we can be criticised for. And I'll give you an example. I live in Whiteinch, and our local park, Victoria Park, has a cenotaph there, and I laid a wreath at the cenotaph last November. The wreaths are still there. There were about 5 wreaths. Now they're still there. They're now a scabby mess, bits falling off them, discoloured, dishevelled. I took mine and stuck it in the bin about a month ago because I'd had enough. But it's almost as though you can't even touch them. You can't touch these scabby messes of wreaths. I'm sorry, who is that honouring to keep these things? But so there is definitely a shift to the right in terms of what we can do with the poppy. But in terms of an independent Scotland, I think it's really interesting how we would remember those who have died. And I think probably the best, it's most interesting to look at our close neighbours Ireland, and when they were celebrating their 1916 centenary, so that was 5 years ago now, when they were celebrating it, they had lots of different events, and one of the events they asked was for primary school children to go and find out about what their grandparents or great-grandparents were doing at the time of the independence drive in Ireland. And a lot of these families were in the understanding that their grandparents had been in the GPO in the Connell Street. And actually, when the children looked into it, they found out they were in the Somme. So a lot was lost there, and Ireland's journey, it became too toxic because of what they went through, because of their experience with the Black and Tans, and then the War of Independence, the extended War of Independence. It became too toxic to actually remember those, their own ancestors and themselves actually, that had served in the British Armed Forces. And I think that's something that we need to be careful about. We need to make sure that in an independent Scotland, we do still respect the service of those who, those veterans, both living and passed away. We need to respect them. We need to keep that. The difficulty is going to be wrenching it back from the hard right, and that's where it's beginning to lie, and that's going to be difficult. And actually, I think that needs members of the public, not just armed forces personnel, but members of the public who are independent supporters, to engage more with remembrance. And unfortunately, there's not enough doing that.
We can definitely learn from other countries, and I don't think we need to start this from scratch if we want to do something different. Cliff, you gave an example. There's a couple of people in the chat giving examples as well. How better can we treat veterans in an independent Scotland?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things. I mean, where do you start with that? I think one of the really easy things to do would be to ensure that every veteran has a decent house to live in, and that might be, for example, social housing. That is such a simple thing to solve. When you sign up to the military, you also sign up for a social housing list, which allows you to build up time while you're serving. That's a simple idea. Why are we not doing it? So I think things like that. But I also think we need to be looking at the skills that people are developing in the military and how we translate them. And I think people who are serving should also be given ideas, because sometimes I remember my husband saying, I've got all these skills and don't quite know what to do with them. And you're saying, well, actually, that's exactly what employers are looking for. So I think we need to make better links with employers and veterans as well. But then we look at benefits, then we look at pensions, then we look at lots of other things. So a whole pile of things that we need to be tackling.
This is probably not an area where I'm going to be able to have a very specific answer, because I wasn't in the British forces. So I'm not exactly sure what benefits are and aren't given, really, when it comes down to it. But I do agree very much with what Carol said, is about making sure that there is continued, employment, transitions into employment, transitions into housing, where you can get a good loan for a house. Just this kind of things that, sometimes for some people it's very traumatic to transition from being in the military to civilian life. So, if there's things that can help ease that, that's something you can use in, peacetime and in conflict times. So you can always use it.
I think the main thing is to have a forces covenant that's worth its weight. If the government of the day sends the forces into harm's way, then they should be prepared to help out those that have been physically or mentally injured by such deployments. Because as things stand from Westminster, from what I can see of it, the covenant is just so many words. All right. So we definitely need that, and 100% back up what Carol and Kat have been saying about the transient from the military. And there will always be people that get missed. There's people that just want to drop out and you don't have contact details for, and you never will. But for the vast majority, let's get that transit from being in uniform into civilian life as smoothly and as comfortably as possible.
And Cliff, that obviously, you know, we've covered housing, but I take it you would all agree in terms of mental health, as well as physical health, are areas that we really need to be concentrating on for our military.
Yeah, can I just add on to the
Please.
mental health side of things? Quite often what you'll find is that the military personnel leaving just really don't want to tie in with these people, or you know, if they have got post-traumatic stress. And the reason behind it, I know that, is because I have PTSD, and it took me forever through family coaching, etc., to get in touch with the right people to start to get things done about it. So quite often it's the individual leaving that doesn't want to get in touch with facilities that are there. So maybe better recognition of how the troops, how the forces personnel are on you know, their final discharge might help that matter.
Well, thank you very much, the three of you, for your time. I'm sorry. I'm sorry we had a little bit of a dry run at the start there, which has cut us short by 5 minutes. Because I think that was really interesting, your points there. Cliff, Kat, and Carol, thanks very much.